Okay. So I assumed Rules wasn't coming, so I started this space. But I don't know. Rules, I've invited you to co-host, but lately the Twitter Spaces client has been kind of scared on this. If you invite people to co-host on Android, it doesn't actually work. So let me know if you did or didn't get it. Oh wow, you got it! Hooray! Can you talk as well? Just let's really push the envelope of what is possible on this platform.
Hi.
Hey.
Good morning, everyone.
Are you in bed?
No, but I
Let's
was.
start with some sexy chat. Are you in bed?
I'm not. I'm not dead.
What are you wearing?
I'm wearing clothes. What are you talking about? I do apologize for this state. I was up late cooking golden syrup. No, it's all. Can we sidebar? I was just going about my day, nothing, and then I remembered today is the first day of the seventh moon. And yesterday was the 29th day of the sixth moon. And I thought, well, I need to make golden syrup for mooncakes next in the eighth moon. And it needs to like sit for a month before I can use it. But I can't make it on the seventh moon, otherwise Mother Rules will make me throw it out after the seventh moon. So I had to make it yesterday, so I had to stay up late making it. And so I had to stay up late, and then I woke up, and here I am. How is everyone else doing? And it wasn't that late.
Sorry,
I mean, obviously it was before midnight that I finished it, but like I had to stay up to wait for it to cool and everything. Okay. How's everyone else doing?
I was up past midnight doing my accounts. So it seems like you lead a life of just continuous non-stop pleasure.
Okay, sorry. What are we also talking about? I'm so sorry.
Okay, Hinges is here. And once again, I've failed to get organized enough to have my my copy of Zipporah with me. So you're gonna have to make do, I'm afraid, with leg, or we'll pressure Hinges to read some bits. I don't think we can read the full thing because this is even longer than last week's, I think. Yeah. So I can summarize it and Hinges can chip in, or Hinges can summarize it and I'll chip in, or I won't chip in if I have nothing good to say about it. Could someone share the link to the original text under the post? I think Edward just shared it in the. 1 second. Okay, I'm sharing it now. Oh, 2 requests to speak. Okay. 1 second.
Other people you know, don't be sharing the right to speak with randos. Remember my mistake.
I liked her. I'm pro her.
You're pro the lady who just bombarded into the space and then started singing and then left. Literally was exactly what happened.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's a very Daoist thing to do, and it fits the theme.
My goodness. Yeah. Well, that was about medicine, so maybe anyway. Okay. Let's see.
Yeah. True.
I have been given.
It's not a very medicinal thing to do.
No, it's not. No, I did not feel better. Okay. By the way, I think we should just have you tweet the invites next time, just because I can see there's already more people. We get lots of North Ambrose, I think. Okay, I have been given notes by an unknown benefactor, so I shall sound very well read today. I mean, it's also on a public blog, so I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Well, do you wanna do the intro then?
No. Because I don't know what this is about. I'm reading the notes right now. Okay.
A suggestion. The reading I checked, and it's only 13 paragraphs long, so we could read like 1 or 2 paragraphs at a time and discuss that way.
Yeah. That works. Okay. Although that
Right.
still feels pretty long. I mean, it's 13 long paragraphs. Okay,
I can take the first one.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, pulling it up. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, you can hear me. Okay, that's good. First paragraph of the floods of autumn, or Qiushui. The time of the autumnal floods was come, and the 100 streams were all discharging themselves into the He. Its current was greatly swollen, so that across its channel from bank to bank one could not distinguish an ox from a horse. On this, the spirit earl of the He laughed with great delight, thinking that all the beauty of the world was to be found in his charge. Along the course of the river he walked east till he came to the North Sea, over which he looked, with his face to the east, without being able to see where its waters began. And then he began to turn his face around, looking across the expanse, as if he were confronting Ruo, and said with a sigh, "What the vulgar saying expresses about him who has learned 100 points of the Tao, and thinks that there is no one equal to himself, was surely spoken of me. And moreover, I have heard parties making little of the knowledge of Zhuāngzǐ and the righteousness of Bo Yi, and at first I did not believe them. Now I behold the all but boundless extent of your realms. If I had not come to your gate, I should have been in danger of continuing my ignorance and been left at for long in the schools of our great system." That is the first paragraph.
Okay, do you want to do paragraph 2 as well, and we'll do both in one go, because I think they fit together.
Sure. Just since this is the first I'm reading it, why don't you, when I'm done with the second paragraph, why don't you chime in with some commentary on how these paragraphs fit in with the remainder of the text that we haven't gotten to yet, for those of us who are just now reading it for the first time.
Those specific individuals of us. Yeah, okay.
Yes. Okay. Paragraph 2. Ruo, the spirit lord of the northern sea, said, "A frog in a well cannot be talked with about the sea. He is confined to the limits of his hole. An insect of the summer cannot be talked with about ice. It knows nothing beyond its own season. A scholar of limited views cannot be talked with about the Tao. He is bound by the teaching which he has received. Now you have come forth from between your banks, and behold the great sea. You have come to know your own ignorance and inferiority, and are in the way of being fitted." This is a bizarre sentence. "You have come to know your own ignorance and inferiority, and are in the way of being fitted to be talked about with great principles." Does that sentence make any sense to you? Okay.
Yeah,
Continuing.
it's not particularly elegant, but yeah.
"Of all the waters under heaven, there are none so great as the sea. A myriad of streams flow into it without ceasing, and yet it is not filled, and afterwards it discharges them also without ceasing, and yet it is not emptied. In spring and in autumn it undergoes no change. It takes no notice of floods or of drought. It takes its superiority over such streams, even as the Jiang and the He, cannot be told by measures or numbers, and that I have never, notwithstanding this, made much of myself, is because I compare my own bodily form with the greatness of heaven and earth, and remember that I have received my breath from the yin and the yang. Between heaven and earth I am but as a small stone or a small tree on a great hill. So long as I see myself to be thus small, how should I make much of myself? I estimate all within the 4 seas, compared with it, the space between heaven and earth to not be so large as that occupied by a pile of stones on a large marsh. I estimate our middle states, compared with the space between the four seas, to be smaller than a single grain of rice in a great granary. When we would set forth the number of things in existence, we speak of them as myriads, and man is only one of them. Men occupy all the 9 provinces, but of all whose life is maintained by grain food, wherever boats and carriages reach, men form only one portion. Thus, compared with the myriad of things, they are not equal to a single fine hair on the body of a horse. Within this range are comprehended all the territories which the 5 Ds received in succession from one another 5 emperors. That is, all which the royal founders of the 3 dynasties contended for, all which excited the anxiety of benevolent men, and all which men in office have toiled for, Bo Yi was accounted famous for declining to share in its government. And Zhuāngzǐ was accounted great because of the lessons which he addressed to it. They acted as they did, making much of themselves. They're unlike you, who a long time ago did so of yourself because of your volume of water. And that is the second paragraph of 13 paragraphs of The Floods of Autumn, a chapter of the Zhuāngzǐ.
So thank you. So I guess, yeah, I can sort of relate this to what is going to come next and offer a few discussion points, and then I guess probably Hinges will jump in as well. So this is basically, I guess everyone knows the frog in the well story that gets referenced here, and it gets rehashed as well a bit later in the chapter. So the whole point of this chapter is kind of like, okay, so you've depicted me as a soy jack. What do we do now? So yeah, the frog now knows that the sea exists. So what is he supposed to just give up and sink into nihilism, or yeah, like Herbo says here, yeah, or should he become a Confucian, or what should he do? And the rest of the chapter is going to be a lot of raw, explaining that most of this is a matter of pure perspective. So obviously, if you're human-sized, then an ant looks tiny. But if you're ant-sized, then bacteria looks tiny, and if you're bacteria-sized, then a virus looks tiny, and so on. Which is true. How helpful it is to Herbo in managing his daily affairs, I will leave Hinges to comment.
Yeah, thanks. I can do a real short introduction or a little bit of context, and then there's kind of 2 points that I can share that I think are useful for this. That sounds good.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So this is, it's always fantastic to see a bunch of people, random people, kind of coalescing and coming together to talk about Zhuāngzǐ, which I think is very appropriate, for Taoism, to kind of just let something spontaneously happen, naturally, as it would. And this chapter is chapter 17. It is part of what is called the miscellaneous chapters. I'm sorry. This is it's part of what is called the outer chapters. Chapters 1 through 7 are usually regarded as inner chapters and are regarded as having been composed probably by someone who was called Zhuāngzǐ. Chapters 8 through 22, I think, are usually called the outer chapters. There's debate. Most people think that they were probably written by followers of Zhuāngzǐ. And then chapters, I think 23 to 33 are called miscellaneous. some of those were probably written by Zhuāngzǐ, and some were probably written by other followers. There's two groups. There's kind of two schools, two attitudes. Some people think that the followers of Zhuāngzǐ kind of fragment into various like schools, like the primitivist school, the Yangzhu school, or the Yangists. So one group kind of thinks that the text is very fragmented and that the different chapters don't relate as well to the inner chapters. The outer and miscellaneous don't relate as well. There's another group that thinks that, yeah, they actually do kind of hang together pretty well. And I kind of fall into that second group, right? I actually kind of think that many of these outer chapters really reflect themes from the inner chapters. But many of the outer chapters reflect ideas, concepts, themes, and blend them together, I think, into stories or narratives that help maybe flesh it out a little bit in terms of like one chapter. So that's kind of where I stand. Is I think that if you look at these outer chapters and miscellaneous chapters, I think you can see some of the connections. So that leads me to that's the brief intro. The 2 points I want to mention real quickly is that one of the things that's really, really significant from the inner chapters is chapter 2, called the Qi Wu Lun, or the sorting that evens everything out. The leveling levity was one of the best translations I've seen. I'm sorry, I'm getting all scrambled. That's from chapter 1. Sorry, the sorting that evens things out. The sorting that evens things out. The kind of the way to look at things that makes everything level. And in the Qi Wu Lun, they mentioned this thing called the birth of opposites, right? Which is that like whenever you look at something one way, you can always look at it another way, right? Like everything has different ways you can look at it. There's nothing that can't be looked at in multiple ways. And in particular, there's nothing that cannot be affirmed or negated. And this is just language, right? Like this is just the virtue of language itself, the virtue of like the way that we look at things, of perspectives, right? Like there's nothing that someone can't try to affirm from some point of view. There's nothing that someone can't negate from some point of view. And that there's this real kind of, so this relativity, right? This relativity of perspectives, right? That like all things, these comparisons, big, small, all of these exist in relation to each other, right? Now, what's really interesting is that instead of, I don't think that this means that Zhuāngzǐ himself is kind of committed to moral relativism. So I think the question really is like, when you recognize the relativity of points of view, what do you do then? Right? Like that's kind of like when you realize that like everything can be put into some kind of comparison, everything can be affirmed from some point of view, something can be negated from some, like again, so like do you just revert to nihilism? Do you believe that like nothing matters? I kind of think that there's a I think that Zhuāngzǐ has some answers for that. And I think that this chapter is really nice because it helps people kind of think like, okay, so yeah, we recognize that like everything is perspectival. We recognize everything's, that judgments are relative. And so what do we do then? And I think this chapter is really, really nice because it helps give some good clues or suggestions. Sorry for my mistakes. I'm just talking off the top of my head. And thanks for letting me talk for a minute. I'm going to stop there.
You could make infinite mistakes and we wouldn't pick you up. So yeah, thank you.
Well, yeah, I know. Yang is here, and I knew he would.
Oh, okay.
He's awesome. Like Yang Zhangxu is fantastic. Right.
Yeah.
So,
not
shout out
the ancient
to
Yang, the modern Yang.
Yeah. Shout out to one of our fellow participants who is fantastic.
Yeah, Yangzi, if you got anything to say, go ahead and call me an idiot because that's what makes the spaces lively. You need to generate some emotional conflict here. Rules, you've had time to read your cliff notes. How's that going?
No, I'm just listening. I apologize. Was I supposed to start reading? I apologize. I'm looking at it. It's on the screen. Does that count? I don't know.
Hey, Rules. Why don't you recite chapter or recite the third paragraph? For the edification of the entire space, and then we'll take turns from there.
Oh yeah, that would work. It might actually be an idea to do a couple, because I think 3 and 4 also kind of go together.
They go together like drama llama llama. Okay. That's a very old, that's such a boomer.
Well, actually, no. That there's like a whole segment of chapters here that is all about kind of philosophy of language, and I'm not sure where it stops, but at least the 2 and possibly the next 3. But I'll only ask you to do 2.
Well, there won't be. Okay. Well. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think it's the next 3. But
it begins. The one begins. Well, then may I consent that one?
It's chapter 3. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes, that's what it says.
Yeah.
All right. The Earl of the Hare said, "Well then, may I consider heaven and earth as the ideal of what is great, and the point of a hare as that of what is small?" Roar of the Northern Sea replied, "No, the different capacities of things are illimitable. Time never stops, but is always moving on. Man's lot is ever changing. The end and the beginning of things never occur twice in the same way. Therefore, men of great wisdom, looking at things far off or near at hand, do not think them insignificant for being small, nor much of them for being great. Knowing how capacities differ illimitably, they appeal with intelligence to things of ancient and recent occurrence, without being troubled by the remoteness of the former, or standing on tiptoe to lay hold of the latter. Knowing that time never stops in its course, they examine with discrimination cases of fullness and of want, not overjoyed by success, nor disheartened by failure, knowing the inconstancy of man's lot. They know the plain and quiet path in which things proceed. Therefore they are not overjoyed to live, nor count it a calamity to die, the end and the beginning of things never occurring twice in the same way. We must reckon that what men know is not so much as what they do not know, and that the time since they were born is not so long as that which elapsed before they were born. When they take that which is most small, and try to fill with it the dimensions of what is most great, this leads to error and confusion, and they cannot attain their end. Looking at the subject in this way, how can you know that the point of a hair is sufficient to determine the minuteness of what is most small, or that heaven and earth are sufficient to complete the dimensions of what is most large? The Earl of the Hare said, "The disputers of the world all say, that which is most minute has no bodily form, and that which is most great cannot be encompassed. Is this really the truth?" Roar of the Northern Sea replied, "When from the standpoint of what is small, we look at what is great, we do not take it all in. When from the standpoint of what is great, we look at what is small, we do not see it clearly. Now the subtile essence is smallness in its extreme degree, and the vast mass is greatness in its largest form. Different as they are, each has its suitability, according to their several conditions. But the subtile and the gross both presuppose that they have a bodily form. Where there is no bodily form, there is no longer a possibility of numerical division. Where it is not possible to encompass a mass, there is no longer a possibility of numerical estimate. What can be discoursed about in words is the grossness of things. What can be reached in idea is the subtlety of things. What cannot be discoursed about in words and what cannot be reached by nice discrimination of thought has nothing to do either with subtlety or grossness. Therefore, while the actions of the great man are not directed to injure men, He does not plume himself on his benevolence and kindness. While his movements are not made with a view to gain, he does not consider the menials of a family as mean. While he does not strive after property and wealth, he does not plume himself on declining them. While he does not borrow the help of others to accomplish his affairs, he does not plume himself on supporting himself by his own strength. Nor does he despise those who in their greed do what is mean. While he differs in his conduct from the vulgar, he does not plume himself on being so different from them. While it is his desire to follow the multitude, he does not despise the glib-tongued flatterers. The rank and emoluments of the world furnish no stimulus to him, nor does he reckon its punishments and shame to be a disgrace. He knows that the right and the wrong can often not be distinguished, and that what is small and what is great can often not be defined. I have heard it said, the man of Tao does not become distinguished. The greatest virtue is unsuccessful. The great man has no thought of self. To so great a degree may the lot be restricted. It is doing 2 chapters, right?
All right, should we recap so far?
Yeah,
Yes,
or
please.
do you want me to do the third, since this kind of fits with these? So
Oh, I can
I'll
do
the
the, I
third
can
and
do
then
the,
we'll
I can
recap.
do the third one. I can do the third one.
Okay.
Sure, sorry. Okay. Oh, it's longer. Okay. Am I reading the correct one? Okay. The Earl of the Her said, whether the subject be what is external in things or what is internal, how do we come to make a distinction between them as noble and mean, and as great or small? Bo of the Northern Sea replied, when we look at them in the light of the Tao, they are neither noble nor mean. Looking at them in themselves, each thinks itself noble and despises others. Looking at them in the light of common opinion, their being noble or mean does not depend on themselves. Looking at them in their differences from one another, if we call those great which are greater than others, there is nothing that is not great, and in the same way there is nothing that is not small. We shall thus know that heaven and earth is but as a grain of the smallest rice, and that the point of a hair is as a mound or a mountain. Such is the view given of them by their relative size. Looking at them from the services they render, allowing to everything the service which it does, there is not one which is not serviceable, and extending the consideration to what it does not do, there is not one which is not unserviceable. We know, for instance, that East and West are opposed to each other, and yet that the one cannot be without, suggesting the idea of the other. Thus their share of mutual service is determined. Looking at them with respect to their tendencies, if we approve of what they approve, then there is no one who may not be approved of, and if we condemn what they condemn, there is no one who may not be condemned. There are the cases of Yao and Jie, each of whom approved of his own course and condemned the other. Such is the view arising from the consideration of tendency and aim. Formerly Yao and Shun resigned their thrones, and yet each continued to be Di. Zhe Guai resigned his marquisate, which led to his ruin. Tang and Wu contended for the sovereignty, and each became king. The duke contended for Qi, which led to his extinction. Looking at the subject from these examples of striving by force and of resigning, and from the conduct of Yao on the one hand and of Jie on the other, we see that there is a time for noble acting and a time for mean. These characteristics are subject to no regular rule. A battering ram may be used against the wall of a city, but it cannot be employed to stop up a hole. The uses of implements are different. The horses Qi and Hua Liu could in one day gallop 1,000 li, but for catching rats, they were not equal to a wild dog or a weasel. The gift of creatures are different. The white-horned owl collects its fleas in the night-time and can discern the point of a hair, but in bright day it stares with its eyes and cannot see a mound or a hill. The nature of creatures is different. Hence the saying, shall we not follow and honor the right, and have nothing to do with the wrong? Shall we not follow and honor those who secure good government, and have nothing to do with those who produce disorder? Show a want of acquaintance with the principles of heaven and earth, and with the different qualities of things. It is like following and honoring heaven and taking no account of earth. It is like following and honoring the yin and taking no account of the yang. It is clear that such a course cannot be pursued, yet notwithstanding they go on talking so. If they are not stupid, they are visionaries. These sovereigns resigned their thrones to others in one way, and the rulers of the 3 dynasties transmitted their thrones to their successors in another. He who acts differently from the requirements of his time and contrary to its custom is called a usurper. He who complies with the time and follows the common practice is said to be righteous. Hold your peace, O Earl of the He. How should you know what constitutes being noble and being mean, or who are the small and who the great?
Thank you.
That's the end of the 5th chapter, I think.
That also gave me time to get up and shift places because people just started leaf blowing right behind me.
And now I'm thinking like to recap so far, especially that last chapter, chapter 5 seemed to be about it seemed to be about the relativity of scope, like the scope of what is being talked about at the moment, and a contrast between the noble and the mean, which is one way of saying the great things and the petty things. And it seems to, and when you compare it with the contemplation about physics that we saw in the previous chapter, whether there are things greater than heaven and earth or smaller than the scope of a hair, it seems to be suggesting a philosophical worldview that suggests that there's nothing, like there's no bottom to the size of things and no top to them either. So there's no smallest possible thing, and then there's no largest possible thing. And modern physics is a little different because now we have the quanta, which is the smallest possible distance of time or space, or whatever you want to call it. And then there's also this length of the observable universe. And we're pretty sure that there are things beyond it. We know a little bit about the structure of the universe beyond the observable universe, but anything beyond the point where the expansion of space, any 2 points where the expansion of space between them is faster than the speed of light is by definition not observable. But aside from those 2 things, it seems to be suggesting that beneath the point of a hair, there might be something like what we would now know to be a cell, and then beneath the cell, there would be chemicals and proteins, and beneath those there would be atoms and so forth. So it suggests this is a philosophical discussion, but it's also a discussion of physics, and it's very much suggesting a different view of the world based entirely on that there are arbitrary scopes that can be considered.
Yeah, I was thinking of it in
At the same time,
math terms
humans
rather
are
than physics.
limited to their own scope.
No, I was thinking of it's kind of hinting at fractals and also different kinds of infinity. Cardinal, ordinal, geometric, and so on. Which I guess is stuff that you can kind of get to by pure logic. So it's not implausible that they would have had that concept. Yang, did you have anything?
We were doing so well with
Then
hitting the right themes, and
then we had to bring up math. Sorry.
Physics.
Math is probably the simplest way to observe the concept of scope. Like the idea of a fractal is going to be entirely defined by the scope at which you are looking at the fractal, and there are probably an infinite different number of ways you could look at the fractal and come up with a different pattern, but all the patterns would be self-similar. But so yeah, that's a simple way of looking at scope without going into, you know, string theory about the structure of the universe beyond the observable universe, or the possibility of particles smaller than a quanta.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm maybe not the right person to have this discussion about this interpretation of this part. It doesn't relate to me. If you want to have the discussion, I can participate, but like it's not really.
Okay, fair enough. No, we can go on to the political
Well,
stuff.
it's-
I actually really like the political stuff. It's very legalist.
But it's like political is. I'm not sure if this is really political focused either. I mean, the theme of relativism hits closer, I feel, to these first to this first narrative or this dialogue that keeps on running. But my personal interest is actually if relativism is the right framework, even is the right description of what is being argued here. Because relativism is like, oh, the small can be great and the great can be small. Yeah, that's a point that's being brought up again and again. That's true. But it does seem, and I think Hinges also hinted at that the author tries to go beyond relativism. And there's one term I think that he keeps using as a tool for that, and that is this idea of timeliness, of that things and what things are dependent on the right time or the right conditions under which they exist. And that is not relative. Like you can say, oh, this hair is bigger than whatever is much smaller than a hair. But as a hair, in its own moment, in its own time, in its own context, you know, it didn't just drop from a coconut tree. So it is small.
I'm glad we did the coconut.
So timeliness is a way to go beyond, to transcend the relativism here. And if you go all the way back to what the narrative is, to this so-called Dali, what is translated as great principle, but that's another point that I would personally be interested in discussing. I think great principle is a wrong translation, or at least not a fully appropriate and fully adequate translation of what
how would
Dali
you
does,
translate
and
it then?
really fit the narrative. Well, from the root meaning of pattern, that's basically you know, if you follow the metaphor of the dialogue, right, you have a river that becomes very wide, and in its widening it can no longer distinguish, right, that it says there's no more distinction between a horse and a cow, for example. But still there are still something, there's like banks that limit the river, there are islands that keep popping out of the river, so it's not absolutely distinctless. But then the river still has a course. It follows all the way to the Great Sea. And then suddenly in the sea, there is no following of anything. There's not even a bank. There's not even islands. It's just a big, vast ocean in which everything empties itself. And it doesn't grow bigger. It doesn't grow smaller. It's completely absolute in that sense. In that sense, you cannot say, oh, there's something bigger than that ocean, or there's something smaller than what that ocean, a drop of water that it consists of, and it empties itself in this magical kind of hole, the tailgate. I think we read about it, but we haven't really addressed it. It's a very interesting idea that there's supposed to be a void hole in the middle of the ocean that keeps on sucking all the water out of it, but the water, the level of the sea never descends because it's always allowing itself to be refilled by the rivers. And that hole also never gets filled up. It's like a duality. The river never empties and the hole never fills up, paradoxically. But the explanation that the text itself gives for this is that because it doesn't assume itself as an absolute identity, it still says, okay, I have heaven and earth above and beyond and below me, so I can still, in that sense, I'm not an absolutely great something, and that whole is the same thing. It doesn't do anything. It just receives. It keeps receiving on water. Doesn't do anything with it. So that doesn't fix its identity in that sense. And in that sense, it can use relativity, but it's also not relativity per se. It's something more than being relative to other things, which is why it's absolutely stable. Neither can be filled, neither can be emptied in that sense. So that's you have these words that keep popping up in this dialogue, and that will also be repeated in the other stories. Things like making distinctions, things like timeliness, things like what this is, but also this comparison, right? This relativism. That is part of the story. But in that sense, that is the focus of the story, for me at least, the way I read it. Yeah.
Okay.
But about
sorry, go on.
the lease of, yeah, sorry, I was kind of meandering away from your original question, why I'm not happy with principle.
Yeah. No, I was just going to ask if cultural literati, whether the hand up was to do with this, or should be, it's a different topic.
To chime in. I was just going to comment on some of the things Yang Zhongnu is talking about. So, like, with the metaphor he's bringing up of the sea having a hole in it that it sinks into, while rain comes, while water comes down from springs or from the sky through rain. That's of course completely different from the ocean that we know, which is just a reservoir that evaporates. But the idea of that is strikingly similar to a Western idea about Elyon and Abaddon, with Elyon being the sources of God, etc., of the heaven, the hosts of heaven, and Abaddon being the pits of hell. And there's I think this Jewish idea that heaven was where things spontaneously came from, and hell was where things went to be destroyed, and that's how Earth created a balance. After that, I just wanted to comment on like you were saying, some of the political points and of like what would be a great thing to do in office, a noble thing, and then what would be a mean or ignoble thing. But we should I'll let you decide when we start talking about the political the political discussion of what is nobleness and what is meanness.
Yeah, I want to do the political stuff as well, but Xia Dynasty, you have something as well. Got a hand up.
Yeah, do you mind if I just say a couple things?
Yeah, sure.
So like what I was thinking about in this chapter is like to reiterate on the topic of like space, because like space is subjective in a way, and like the interpretation of space and time is like still a subjective process, which like invokes what Chris Fraser calls like the heterogeneity of value, which like means that like under the normative framework where we like hold our affirmations, the things that like are being indicted in the Chulun, we are like prone to making errors in judgment because we like misjudge how we should consider and evaluate different circumstances because they are inherently unpredictable. So like relying on predictable standards for evaluation forces us to make errors like this chapter is talking about with misunderstanding. So the only way to rectify this is to adopt the process of pivoting through understandings of things, which is like what's being talked about in the famous line, you can't discuss the ocean with a frog, you can't discuss the way with a cramped scholar. When you adopt certain standards for making judgments, you open yourself up to errors and ethical judgments because you end up relying on those original ontological distinctions which perpetuate conflict, which Zhuāngzǐ talks about in the Qiulun, like i.e. disputants can never cease in their argumentation. The sort of linguistic ontological philosophy that's taken in that part of the inner chapters, which relies on the notion of that things are thus when named, which is like how Zhuāngzǐ formulates his critique of Longgongsun, saying like using a white horse to try and disprove the ontological basis for the notion of horse still like reinvests in the concept of horse. So like adapting that back to the interpretation of space and time is still important here.
Yeah, I think that fits. Yeah, so sorry, we kind of jumped in the middle of your thing. So, oh, got it. Rules. Hinges has his hand up as well. Yang, if you want to go, and then Hinges.
Yeah, maybe I'll because the last point by Shah Dynasty about how this the content of this chapter can be compared to the Qiulun, in that you have to as an ideal to kind of circulate and circumvent in between positions to avoid making absolute statements. Could be, but I would prefer to stick as close to the actual argument in this chapter as possible if you draw that kind of conclusions. And then I'm not so sure how well these two chapters overlap in that sense, because for example in this first dialogue alone, it's not that you cannot talk to a frog about the great ocean. That's actually what you can, in that sense. What Raw does to Herbal is like talking to a frog about the great ocean. So it is very much possible, and I'm not sure if the answer that is being given by Herbal in this chapter is comparable to this idea of hinging and moving around issues from standpoint to standpoint. It's in there, I think. Further on, the ideal of the potter's wheel is mentioned, so it is related, but I'm not sure if that's the main point of this chapter. And if you say it is, then I would ask, where in this text does he make that point precisely? Because else it's too easy to just say, oh, what is being said in this chapter is the same as in Qiulun, and then we might as well not read this chapter. It's the same kind of what I worry about with using relativism, because there's a term that we know from epistemology and that we have very fixed ideas about. They say, oh, Zhuāngzǐ is a relativist. And then we just ignore what is actually being said in the argument about the relationship between conflicting values, for example, or between this and that, etc., and what the solution, according to the author of this chapter, is, precisely as is mentioned in the argument itself, without us putting our own ideas on top of that and just kind of burying the actual lead with that. That's kind of my worry. What I have with using kind of extra textual terms like relativism or other extra textual contexts like the Qiulun chapter. But yeah, I'll pass it to Hinge, and I'll leave the discussion of Dali, whether it's principle or pattern, maybe for another time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I agree with Zhuāngzǐ on particularly on the point of the word relativism, because the word relativism never, like, it's not a term that's used in Chinese texts, and it's a term that gets used by Western philosophers when they first encounter the text and they try to understand it. And I tend to, but it's also a term, we're all speaking in English, and it's a term that we're going to come across, right? So I do think it's useful to like argue and debate about it, and to then think, okay, well, how is the text moving beyond relativism? And one of the things that, I actually spent a lot of time thinking about the Qi Wu Lun, maybe too much time. And there's this really good question in the Qi Wu Lun that most of the philosophers forget, is that Zhuāngzǐ says, how is it that the way becomes obscured by language? Right? Like, how did we get to this point where language is causing us to be really, really, really confused about Dao, about the way, about the Great Course, and to lose track of it? That we spend all of our time making judgments and firing off, like crossbow bolts and swearing oaths, that this is the hill I'm going to die on. And, the mind struggling and killing its, like darkening itself with struggle and strife and conflict. The light of the mind goes out through wrestling over these judgments. So I think that's something really useful, and I think that this chapter helps point to that, and that kind of the recognizing I like to call it just like the epistemological limitations, right? Just the inborn limitations of how we think, how we know things, right? We can talk about it from physics, from math, but from logic, however we do it, but like every way of knowing has its own intrinsic limitations. And this is one of the really important things in Zhuāngzǐ in particular, is that when we use these things, when we take any way of knowing something and turn it into like a fixed judgment, then we're losing sight of something bigger. And I really like this chapter. I really, really like this chapter, Autumn Floods, because I think that it is really trying to draw us back to this idea of what is the big picture, and when we can see the bigger picture about the limitations, our epistemological limitations. And then again, relativism is maybe one way to talk about that, but I think there's other ways, Yeah, so again, how do we deal with these limitations? And when you see this bigger picture, what do you do? And there's some really nice answers in this chapter.
All right. So I did want to talk about the political aspects, but honestly, the discussion seems kind of truncated. So at this point, I think I'm going to say it's my turn to read again, and I'm going to start reading from chapter 6.
Yeah.
So chapter 6 of the Floods of Autumn.
Sorry, Yangsa had a hand up.
Or should I
don't know. I did.
Yeah, let's let him.
I did kind of want to do the political stuff. I don't know if you want to do it now or after the next chapter, but yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry that I can be a little bit annoying to stuck to this truncated discussion, but if Hinches mentions that, and I go along with him quite a ways, until at the end he says, well, maybe the point of this chapter is the limitations of knowledge, kind of, right? If I do injustice to your conclusion, let me know.
I don't mean that the point of the chapter is the limitations, but I think remembering those limitations helps us with this chapter, right?
But even that kind of framework, like say, remember the limitations of knowledge. And if I look at most of the stories in this chapter, and we will hopefully end up with the final anecdote, right, when Zhuāngzǐ is talking with Huizhe on at the river How, and he says, these fish are happy. Well, actually, that's a statement, that's a conclusion that Zhuāngzǐ draws, which I do see as positive, unlimited, in that sense, knowledge. In that context, at that moment, he is completely right to make that judgment, according to the author of this chapter, at least. So in that sense, and the same with the great principle, it's not that the great principle is limited or that we have to think of it as some kind of skepticism or relativism. No, according to the author, according to the story that he's telling us, there's no indication that this great principle or this great pattern is limited in that sense, or that it doesn't allow us to have knowledge. Well, maybe knowledge is the wrong word, but you can say about things what they are and what they not are. It's completely fine to call a hair small or to call the earth and the sky great in that sense. It's just as soon as you use this knowledge in a certain way and you give it a certain identity, then the author will remind you run into these and that problems. But it's not to say that knowledge is limited per se in the Zhuāngzǐ sense. He has a solution for that issue.
Yeah, I think we could. I think we would converge. I think we can eventually converge, and yeah.
It's definitely like the question here is definitely one of scope. It's not one of values or evaluation. Like there's no doubt, there's no ambiguity in what an evaluation is. I mean, in this case, the point of a hair would be smaller than a tick by the exact same amount, whether you look at it, like it mentioned from this earlier, whether you're looking at it from the perspective of something so small that the point of a hair appears to be a mountain to it, or whether you're looking at it from the point of view of heaven. But if there are no other questions, is there any? Yang Zhou wants to say something.
Sorry. I can't resist. Like even with scope, I'm not even talking about values in that sense, but even as scope, if you say, oh, we can absolutely say that the hair is smaller than this or that is bigger than this. The point that even this first dialogue makes is that which is a solution to this problem of making absolute statements cannot be expressed in words very clearly. As long as you talk in words, you have to do with the subtle or with the coarse, etc. That's in the realm of language, of analysis, of talking about scope, etc. But the real foundation of making such judgment transcends language. The text itself says it clearly, and with your intent, you can reach to it, but you will not get to that which is beyond the subtle and the coarse. What is beyond the subtle and the coarse? That is what this text tries to suggest, but it can never say it in analytical language. So it has to use metaphors, analogies, etc. But then you get into the realm of the Dali. So if you say, what is the Dali compared to this or that, then you run into a dead end because you cannot say it or explain it in that way. You can only hint at that transcendental solution. But the text itself is quite clear about this. It's not really that something you have to speculate about. You can just go to that part where it talks about the difference between the subtle and the coarse and what can help to go beyond that. That's already in this first dialogue.
Yang Zhou, do you have the dialogue pulled up already?
Well, I'm reading the Lin today. I'm reading the Lin translation, which has the Guoxiang commentary, but I also have the C-text Chinese version.
Do you want to read the 6th paragraph, chapter, whatever you want to call it?
I'm not sure if Lin uses the same kind of paragraph.
Oh, the link I have posted up on the billboard on the space should have that if that's more comfortable for you to read.
We have finished the whole dialogue between Hebo and Ro, right? So now
No, I don't believe so. No, I think Ro is about to say something more. Yeah, the Earl of Huh actually. Wait, hold on.
No, there is more to
Yeah,
do.
the Earl of Huh is about to say something. Yeah, there's quite a bit more to do. We're at the sixth paragraph is what we need to read right now, and this is out of 13 paragraphs total. So I can do that right now, or you can if you want to.
Maybe you or and I really like.
All right,
Rules's
I'll do
way
it. I'll do it. Okay.
Reads it.
All right. I'll read right now because Rules already went a little bit, so I guess I'll come back and we'll say it's my turn again after I did the first and second chapters. All right. So beginning the sixth chapter of autumn floods. The Earl of the Huh said, "Very well, but what am I to do and what am I not to do? How am I to be guided after all in regard to what I accept or reject and what I pursue or put away from me?" Ro of the Northern Sea replied, "From the standpoint of the Tao, what is noble and what is mean? These expressions are but the different extremes of the average level. Do not keep pertinaciously to your own ideas, which put you in such opposition to the Tao. What are few and what are many? These are denominations which we employ in thanking donors or patrons or benefactors, I guess, and dispensing gifts. Do not study to be uniform in doing so. It only shows how different you are from the Tao. Be severe and strict, like the ruler of a state who does not selfishly bestow his favors. Be scrupulous, yet gentle, like the tutelary spirit of the land. When sacrifice is offered to him who does not bestow his blessing selfishly. Be large-minded like space, whose four terminating points are illimitable, and form no particular enclosures. Hold all things in your love. Hold on, lost my place. Hold all things in your love, favoring and supporting none especially. This is called being without any local or partial regard. All things are equally regarded. There is no long or short among them. There is no end or beginning to the Tao. Things indeed die and are born, not reaching a perfect state where they can be relied on. Now there is emptiness and now fullness. They do not continue in one form. The years cannot be reproduced, time cannot be arrested. Decay and growth, fullness and emptiness. When they end, begin again. It is thus that we describe the method of great righteousness and discourse about the principle pervading all things. The life of things is like the hurrying and galloping along of a horse. With every moment there is a change. With every movement there is a change. With every moment there is an alteration. What should you be doing? What should you not be doing? You have only to be allowing this course of natural transformation to be going on. And then something is deleted. Should I read chapter 7 as well? Okay, 7. Actually, all the chapter 8 is kind of broken up weird on the site.
Go ahead, because I have to go
what
upstairs and plug my phone in, so I'm gonna be. It's gonna cut out for me. Well, oh shit! I didn't realize that. Fuck. What do I do?
That might cut out for all of us.
Yeah, it's gonna cut out for everyone.
Make Rules co-host again.
Does that fix the problem?
I think if Rules is co-host,
yeah,
it's our best chance, probably.
Okay. I will.
Okay, Rules.
If the stairwell is open, I'll go up the stairs so that it doesn't cut out. But yeah, okay, let's go.
All right, Rules. Are you co-host yet? Or
okay. Am I co-host? I don't think I am at the moment because I dropped out because my phone exploded.
Okay. I'll re-invite you 1 second.
Okay, hold on. I'm waiting for the co-host station. So what am I expected to do as co-host? Oh, I can read my
what we need you to do is we need you to stand in the north and face south.
Stand in the north. I'm in the east.
Yeah.
That's what we need you to do.
East.
We need you to do literally nothing.
Okay.
We need you to do nothing except to be co-host.
Okay, no. I can read the cliff notes that I was given, and then
that works too.
Yes, sure. I don't know how it fits though because I'm just kind of listening and vibing.
and just thinking, how does this apply to my mountain life?
No. If
I'm still not
cultural
focused,
literati, if cultural literati is reading, then that is
Yeah.
fine. That will fill. Yeah, I don't need you to fill. I just need you to be a co-host.
Oh, he's reading. Okay.
Okay.
Then read away and make me co-host. Okay.
All right. Also, I kind of don't want to read if it's going to cut out and I'll have to read again. But
yeah. Oh, okay.
if that happens, I'll just shove the job on someone else if that happens, so I don't have to read it twice. In that case, I don't care. I'll check back in at the end of this chapter, and hopefully you'll be more settled in by then.
Rules enjoys reading to dead air, so maybe you can do it.
Excuse me, I don't enjoy reading.
All right, he can do it if we need to do it again. All right, so chapter 7. The Earl of He said, "What then is so valuable in the Tao?" Ro of the Northern Sea replied, "He who knows the Tao is sure to be well acquainted with the principles that appear in the procedures of things. Acquainted with those principles, he is sure to understand how to regulate his conduct in all varying circumstances. Having that understanding, he will not allow things to injure himself. Fire cannot burn him who is so perfect in virtue, nor water drown him. Neither cold nor heat can affect him injuriously. Neither bird nor beast can hurt him. This does not mean that he is indifferent to those things. It means that he discriminates where he may safely rest and where he will be in peril. That he is tranquil equally in calamity and happiness. That he is careful what he avoids and what he approaches, so that nothing can injure him. Hence it is said, what is heavenly is internal. What is human is external. The virtue of man is in what is heavenly. If you know the operation of what is heavenly and what is human, you will have your root in what is heavenly and your position in virtue. You will bend or stretch only after the necessary hesitation. You will have returned to the essential and may be pronounced to have reached perfection. What do you mean, pursued the Earl, by the heavenly and by the human? Ro replied, Oxen and horses have 4 feet. That is what I call their heavenly constitution. When horses' heads are haltered and the noses of oxen are pierced, that is what I call the doing of man. Hence it is said, not by the human doing. Hence it is said, do not by the human doing extinguish the heavenly constitution. Do not, for your human purposes, extinguish the appointment of heaven. Do not bury your proper frame in such a pursuit of it. Carefully guard the way and do not lose it. This is what I call reverting to your true nature. All right, and I yield back to
okay. I made
XYCB.
it. I'm now upstairs with my phone plugged in. So yeah. Okay.
Hey.
What do we do now? After that moment of drama.
I suppose we could discuss chapter 6 and 7.
Yeah,
there wasn't that much political to discuss really. I think it was all in chapter 5, and I thought it was like so truncated. There has to be more, and then I read it, and then there wasn't. So
there is already one link you can see here to the story of Zhuāngzǐ fishing at the Pool River and refusing to serve in the court as a glorified artifact. It's the same idea that you shouldn't hurt your natural well-being for the sake of something that only has artificial human purpose. That's the same idea, kind of what is being said here. Like Zhuāngzǐ leaving his happy state, relaxing at the Pool River to go serve at the court will be hurting his tian, what is given to him already by itself in the natural state. And instead letting his nose be pierced at the court to serve as an advisor. I think that's the same idea. So that will be a political angle, even though I think this is still less politically oriented and more, let's say, getting into kind of a therapeutic argument here. Zhuāngzǐ as therapy.
Well, I think it's a virtue based argument. It seems to be it's discussing it discusses what the virtuous action would be, which, on the one hand you'd think maybe, okay, that is like, relative, but it's also about like, in some cases, your prowess as a government official or any other political position. Because if we look back at chapter 5, the political discussion was essentially based on 4 examples. There were the 2 emperors who resigned, and then, despite resigning, essentially maintained their social position. And then there was a marquis who resigned and then was utterly ruined. And then there was the example of 2 kings who contended with each other and both ended up king, and a third who contended and ruined himself. And the purpose there was to reject any kind of sound principle. It was that there was the timeliness of the Tao is what decides what is. The timeliness is what decides what is coarse and what is subtle, or what is gross and what is mean.
Yeah,
That's true.
that's what I wanted to lead
one-
into as well. The bit about saying you can't have good governance without bad governance, which that is the bit that I wanted to get into a bit. So I think that does tie in with the time dimension in this thing. So obviously, if you behead someone now, then that is kind of bad. But then if it turns out he was gonna commit a ton of crimes in the future, then in the future it turns out to be good and all the rest of it. Which I think does tie into the relativity of language. So I don't want to shill my own bags, but I posted an article that I wrote in the links below about the idea that if you're stuck with the sort of the first order logic of language, you have to say either X is Y or X is Z, and it can't be both Y and Z. Then you're limited in trying to describe the phenomena that Taoists are most interested in, and that's sort of the source of a lot of their frustration. But then if you can get into different representations, so non-linguistic representations of these things, I think the example I used was my favorite, the Lotka-Volterra diagram, where you can say, okay, more foxes now is bad for rabbits in sort of a month down the line, but it's actually good for rabbits 6 months down the line. So you can actually say in that case, X is Y and X is Z, and it's the time dimension that determines it. So you go up a level of abstraction, and you become capable of saying this precisely. And then you can go up even further. You can model it, and you can have sort of millions of dimensions now, all going on and letting you say everything all at once, which is a very Taoist thing. So yeah, that's just my spiel. Read my Substack and subscribe. It's what all the cool kids do. Okay. But actually, before we go on to the next chapter, if anyone else wanted to say so. Oh, cultural literati. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'll just raise on some of the points from this chapter that we've read so far, that we're reading so far. I guess there are 2 points that I want to make in chapter 6 and 7. Let me see. So the first point, I guess, is it's very legalist. It's a very legalist point. And he says in chapter 6, "Be severe and strict, like the ruler of the state, who does not selfishly bestow his favors. Be scrupulous yet gentle, like the tutelary spirit of the land. When sacrifice is offered to him who does not bestow his blessing selfishly." So a lot of this, there's not so much discussion of maybe historical politics, because even the example of the emperors and the marquis and the dukes and so forth, those are basically in deep mythical history. So this is not like a discussion of historical politics, but it is a discussion of a sort of virtue ethics of politics, which
sort of is, it's blowing my mind because I've been reading Plutarch, and all Plutarch talks about is what was virtuous to do in this position and what was mean to do, and or petty, and was it better to be petty in this situation or to be noble and aloof? And I guess the second point I wanted to make is towards the end of chapter 7, there's an analogy that you should be seeing here. The analogy of the horses, of the oxen and horses, that should be remind you of the famous analogy of the horse with the hobble and the saddle and the bit, and you have to ask at what extent is it human, and to what extent is it still a horse, and what is the human imposition? So I guess I'll refinish off the chapter 7 here, and hence it says, "Do not by the human doing extinguish the heavenly constitution. Do not for your human purposes extinguish the appointment of heaven. Do not bury your proper frame in such a pursuit of it. Carefully guard the way and do not lose it. That is what I call reverting to your true nature." So here it says, it seems to be contrasting meanness or smallness with the human scope, and it seems to be implying that greed and sort of pettiness and that sort of thing, that is the human scope, and then the noble or divine scope, that is what the true nature of a thing is versus what materially you make it become versus what it is by its own nature and inclination intended to be. And I guess I can read chapter 8, or if we want to rotate over to someone else, we could do that too.
Okay, I actually wanted to bring up some of the comments that people have been making in the Discord and the replies. So Swaying Paul says, does anyone else read the story as this kind of self-dialogue? Like when the river guy reaches the sea, isn't he himself the sea? That's kind of cool. I didn't actually think about it like that, but yeah.
This whole thing is just therapy. It's just therapy. I'm convinced we're reading an ancient session of therapy and dissecting it. And shut up.
Yeah. And oh god, what else was there? Oh yeah, leading into the next the next section, there's a bit that Edward cited in the Discord that I really wanted to read, because I actually think we're heading into this very sort of long and rambling story about millipedes, which I'm not sure if the translation is not great, or I guess these Zhuāngzǐ animal stories are always really hard to translate in a way that is relevant, because we don't have the cultural context for what ancient Chinese people thought a millipede's personality was like or whatever. But I think what Edward quoted in the Discord from the Lieza is actually really, it's a better way of phrasing this, basically. So here it goes. Tian of Qi said, "How generous heaven is to mankind. It grows the 5 grains and breeds the fish and birds for the use of man." But a 12-year-old boy of the Pao family, who had a seat among the guests, came forward and said, "It is not as your lordship says. The myriad things between heaven and earth, born the same way that we are, do not differ from us in kind. One kind is no nobler than another. It is simply that the stronger and cleverer something, the weaker and sillier. Things taken in turns to eat each other, but they are not bred for each other's sake. Men take the things which are edible and eat them, but how can it be claimed that heaven bred them originally for the sake of man? Besides, mosquitoes and gnats bite our skin. Tigers and wolves eat our flesh. Did heaven originally breed man for the sake of mosquitoes and gnats, and his flesh for the sake of tigers and wolves?" So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Oh, rule the weaker. Okay, yeah.
So the implication there, I guess the implication there is that heaven produces a surplus, but the surplus itself, while beneficial to man, would be of no moral significance. Would be amoral. Is that what you think the implication there is?
Yeah, that would be my reading. I think that Also, I would quibble Leg's translation. Actually, I was just trying to look up what word does Zhuāngzǐ originally use for selfish here? I'm reading on a Kindle, so I can't really search very easily. Because my feeling is that selfish is probably not a very good translation.
There will be
I bet it's, I think probably partial would be better, but I can't find the actual thing here. So I will double check and get back to you. But
well,
yeah.
I could just I could start reading the chapter 8, and then we can go from there.
It's
yeah, that works.
Full.
Oh, sorry. What was it?
So it's what is used for.
Sorry. Let's do that.
What Lin translates as partial, indeed.
Have I lost?
Hello.
Have I lost my sound? I think
you did for a second there.
Okay. Yeah. I just realized I was on Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi isn't bad, so it isn't good. So, wow, all this relativism, I can no longer describe the quality of my own Wi-Fi. Okay. Yeah.
All right. I'll read chapter 8.
Yeah. You go ahead.
Okay. All right. Chapter 8. This is weird. It doesn't say who's speaking. It says the quay desires to be like the millipede to be like the serpent to be like the wind to be like the eye, and the eye to be like the mind. The quay said to the millipede, "With my one leg I hop about and can hardly manage to go along. Now you have a myriad feet which you can employ. How is it that you are so abundantly furnished?" The millipede said, "It is not so. Have you not seen one ejecting saliva? The largest portion of it is like a pearl, while the smaller portions fall down like a shower of mist in innumerable drops. Now I put in motion the springs set in me by heaven without knowing how I do so." The millipede said to the serpent, "I go along by means of my multitude of feet, and yet how is it that I do not go as fast as you who have no feet at all?" The serpent replied, "How can the method of moving by the springs set in us by heaven be changed? How can I make use of feet?" The serpent said to the wind, "I get along by moving my backbone and ribs, thus appearing to have some bodily means of progression. But now you, sir, rise with blustering force in the North Sea, and go on in the same way to the South Sea, seemingly without any such means. How does it take place?" The wind said, "Yes, with such blustering force I rise in the North Sea and go on to the South Sea. But you can point to me, and therein are superior to me, as you are also treading on me. Yet notwithstanding, it is only I who can break great trees, and blow down great houses. Therefore, he whom all that are small cannot overcome is a great overcomer. But it is only he who is sagely man that is the great conqueror of all."
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
and that's the end of chapter 8.
It's not the best Zhuāngzǐ animal story, or at least not the one that hits best to a modern audience. But yeah, I don't know if anyone has anything to say about millipedes, but if not, I can go on to the next one, because we have a few cute ones coming up towards the end. There's the happy fish, which everyone likes.
You want me to read chapter 9 now, or
No,
is it someone else's?
wait.
Where are we at?
I have something to say.
Rules, do you want to do? Oh, yeah, Yangza has something to say. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So I think one thing that would help for the point of the story to come across better, if it's confusing, is that in Chinese, what is used for, in classical Chinese, the word for foot.
I can't hear him, but I'm not sure.
Right, the quay. Yeah, I see. Am I not getting through? Or
possibly,
I can hear you.
Not.
I can hear, yeah. I actually hear Shenyang and Yangzhe.
Okay, so
okay,
I'm
I will
going to
just
speak
be
it
quiet and enjoy my enforced silence. But yeah, you guys go ahead and just someone poke me when when I'm needed. Hopefully the sound will come back. Bye.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. But anyway, so all these creatures, the quay with one foot, the millipede with a lot of foot, the wind with no foot, but yeah, with a form, and then with the eye, etc. The word that is kept being used for foot in classical Chinese is zu, which has the same meaning or is a homonym with sufficiency, with having enough, with being satisfied. So if it talks about the quay having one foot, at the same time, it's alluding or suggesting that this quay is satisfied with only one thing, namely his specialty or whatever. You can have a whole story about the mythological context of quay. There's a lot going on there. But even if we just move on to the millipede, so the millipede has what it says in Chinese, 10,000 feet. Another way to think about it, it's able to be satisfied with 10,000 small things. It's able to multitask, for example. So that's the metaphor. And then you come to the wind. It has no feet at all. Well, then at the same time, this suggests it has nothing that it feels satisfied or that it wants to be satisfied about or that it cares about being satisfied about. It's wu zu. And that's better even than just having one thing to be satisfied about or having a lot of things to be satisfied about. You don't need to worry about being satisfied at all. But then that's even upended by something greater, which is the eye, which in Chinese is linked to visibility, which is the same word that is also used for the kind of intelligence you would, the kind of knowledge you get from seeing things clearly, Ming. So why is this eye even better than the wind? It's because it takes the form from something else and then translates it to its own satisfaction. So it's able to take the satisfaction of someone else for its own satisfaction. The wind cannot do that. It can only go from one place to there. But if someone puts up a thumb or finger in the air, it has no way to deal with that finger. It can blow over a house or a big tree, but that's only certain things in relation to it. It's not absolute. But the eye can see anything, doesn't matter what, and as it were, change places with that thing. See things from another point of view. So in that sense, this story isn't that weird of all. It's very coherent. The theme is consistent, and as a fable, I think actually it's pretty good for the Zhuāngzǐ standard. It's not very confusing, and it has many different layers in it as well. The only thing that's a little bit weird is the final step. That's kind of what makes it harder, because the text itself doesn't really go on what is the exact association and meaning of this level of the I, of the Mu and its Ming, and its concrete relation to the sage. It's a little bit vague in that final part, and it's also, if you would read the commentaries on this part, then they also kind of drop off to the end. It's kind of strange. They usually stop with talking about the wind and then immediately jump to the sage and forget about the level of the eye. But I think that's actually still the most important level of this argument. It's also something that Guoxiang does mention specifically. And then one small point is that the comment was made that, oh, this text doesn't make clear who is speaking. But if I understand that question correctly,
no, that was just my comment on what I was talking about at the beginning of the chapter. I assume that the speaker from the previous chapter continued speaking into chapter 8.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that we finished that dialogue between Hebo and Raw now, and this is a completely standalone anecdote that thematically can be linked, but it's completely narratively separated from what came before it and what comes after it. It's just a small vignette in that sense.
All right. Yeah, that was kind of an important thing to know about the homophone, the homophonic pun, as it were, between what you said, the millipede, the whatever worm it was that only had 1 foot, and the millipede that had 10,000 foots, and the homophone between foot and contentment, and how a thing with one contentment could have many contentments. That's one of the language issues that I'm not personally too strong on. The language puns that are essential to the experience of reading the text, but that are actually much worse than untranslatable. They're like conceptually not a thing that can occur in Western language. All right. Without objection, then, I will continue reading chapter 9. So, chapter 9. When Confucius, and this appears to be a new anecdote. When Confucius was traveling in Kuang, some people of Song once surrounded him with hostile intention several ranks deep, but he kept singing to his lute without stopping. Zulu came in and said to him, "How is it, master, that you are so pleased?" Confucius said, "Come here and I will tell you. I have tried to avoid being reduced to such a strait for a long time, and that I have not escaped shows that it was so appointed for me. I have sought to find a ruler that would employ me for a long time, and that I have not found one, shows the character of the time." So the fact that he hasn't found one shows the character of the time. Under Yao and Shun, there was no one in the kingdom reduced to straits like mine, and it was not by their sagacity that men succeeded as they did. Under Jie and Zhou, no good and able man in the kingdom found his way to employment, and it was not for want of sagacity that they failed to do so. It was simply owing to the times and their character. People that do business on the water do not shrink from meeting iguanodons and dragons. That is the courage of fishermen. Those who do business on land do not shrink from meeting rhinoceroses and tigers. That is the courage of hunters. When men see the sharp weapons cross before them and look on death as going home, that is the courage of the determined soldier. When he knows that his strait is determined for him, and that the employment of him by a ruler depends on the character of the time, and then meeting with great distress is yet not afraid, that is the courage of the sagely man. Wait, my good Yo, and you will see what there is determined for me and my lot. A little afterwards, the leader of the armed men approached and took his leave, saying, "We thought you were Yang Hu, and therefore surrounded you. Now we see our mistake." With this, he begged to take his leave and withdrew. And that's the end of chapter 9. So that's a completely separate anecdote. Comments?
Well, one thing that got me thinking when I read this anecdote is, like, Zhuāngzǐ, of course, likes to play around with Confucius and taking the piss out of him repeatedly. But in this specific anecdote, it's actually, if you would lift it out of the Zhuāngzǐ and forget about the whole Zhuangzian context, this could have been in its entirety just an anecdote that you could find in the Analects or in other so-called revered Confucian texts. It's quite it uses Confucius not in a weird way and in a positive way from a Confucian point of view. There's nothing in here that really conflicts with Confucian dogma and all these themes of knowing your destiny or timeliness. Even this idea of shi, the kind of the position in which you are, that you have to navigate your surroundings, and that determines the course of action. It's quite consistent. So I almost would speculate that this anecdote would have existed even before the composition of this chapter, and might as well been borrowed by the author from some Confucian story that was going the rounds through the so-called Ru traditions at the time. It's there seems to be very little Zhuāngzǐ editing, or let's say making it ironic or turning it into a joke or something that you would have, that you find in a lot of these other Kongzi stories in the Zhuāngzǐ. That's, to me, is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this, I mean, the entire structure of the thing is basically a Confucian. It's basically it's an anecdote. It's an anecdote from something like the Analects. Only at the very end, like as you said, he took the piss. It's basically at the very end. There's a punchline about how this is all essentially just a misunderstanding, and the this dialogue that Confucius has said, indicting his times and the nature of fate. It's almost like he's contrasting, or it's almost like Zhuāngzǐ, or the author of this text at least, is contrasting fate and the absoluteness of the way with on the other hand, the meanness, you might say, or the coarseness of what in West would be called fortuna, or random chance. So this entire anecdote, it seems to be mostly one of chance, and it seems to be implicitly stating that it's misguided to assign to the way what is essentially just chance. And that's why we see, like, in a lot of this dialogue so far, there's talk about nobility, but there's talk about meanness as well, and both of these are said to have their own necessary and redeeming values. And here it seems like for Confucius to take the mean course and simply address the people who are confronting him instead of playing his lute like nothing is going on would be perhaps the more correct solution. But and then again, apparently this Confucian dialogue was enough to convince Confucius's captors, or the people detaining him, that no, he was not in fact Yang He or whatever. It's definitely Confucius. Rules, are you there?
Yes. Why?
Okay, it's good. Do you want to read chapter 10?
No, wait.
We have hands up. We have hands up. Well, Yang has his hand up for a while.
Yeah.
Yang.
All right,
So
let's
first of all, like actually, it's my point that there's no taking a piss of Confucius, not even in the end. Like this whole story was a staple theme of Confucius mythology, that he was surrounded by the people of Kuang at one time, mistaking him for Yang Hu, and that even in the so-called officially sanctioned hagiography of Confucius' life, that the resolution was the same as we see in this story. The only slight but maybe significant difference is that Confucius would say something like, "What can these people do to me if I have heaven's blessing? I just do what I need to do, and that's it, and then nothing else matters in that sense. So it is my destiny to try to fix the world, so heaven will help me do that, and that's the only thing I will focus about." Well, here you could say, well, it's not so sure that heaven has any intent of helping Confucius. It's just you have your lot, your fun, and you have your situation, your shi, and you just do what is expedient, what is shiran, and that's it. That's all you can do. There's no, like, if you say, oh, it's all chance, from a Zhuāngzǐ perspective, you can probably say that, but even saying that would mean that the so-called Dao, the way, is in fact chance, and it is a positive thing, and that even in its randomness, it's completely legitimate, and it's a good way to follow in that sense. Now, from a Confucian perspective, that's not completely at odds with what Confucians hold dear or what their values are, they also recognize that there is a Ming, a situation that is out of your control. You might be in situations of poverty, of danger. That's not something you should focus on. For example, Mencius would say you should focus on yourself, on your good human nature, etc. But they still recognize that expedience can be called for, that chance is something that happened and that you just have to deal with and live with and not ignore and value in its own significance. So in that sense, there's really no strong, if I put it mildly, some strong disagreement between what Confucians would say about this story and what Zhuāngzians would say about this story. The only slight difference is that from Confucius' biography and the kind of myth that was built around it, it was believed that he was in sync with some kind of moral tian, some kind of moral heaven. And this kind of moral dimension is not present in this anecdote for understandable reasons. But that's something different than, let's say, satirizing Confucius or using him as a kind of fool or something. This is basically as good a treatment that Confucius can get in the Zhuāngzǐ as that he gets elsewhere. It's almost like he's elevated to the level of a Zhuangzian sage.
Okay, interesting. So we should read it straight. I mean, it's nice that they were respectful to him in one chapter. NHP Rosenberg, do you have something?
Yes,
sorry.
There's many chapters where they do that. It's not just one chapter where he's always flipping between being a fool and being a kind of Zhuangzian sage. And that's not unique to Confucius either. That happens to almost all these recurring characters. That happens to Zhuangzi himself. It happens to Huizhi. It happens to Liezi. It's almost rarely that you have a figure in the Zhuangzi that recurs in several anecdotes that's always at the same level of very absolute goodness. Even the highest kind of Taoist mystics like Si Wangmu or Zuyou have different treatments throughout the book.
It's giving Candide, yes, where you kind of die and come back to life for no reason. NHP Rosenberg, did you have something to say?
First, all these tales of Confucius would have been quite familiar to people back when Zhuangzi was written. So I think it's best. And Zhuāngzǐ said that the story of him being surrounded by the men of song is one of them. So I think we should not look so much at the part that is the Confucius hagiography. We should look specifically at the parts that are different, because that specifically would be the part that is the part that is probably meant to be meaningful. It's like when you're watching a fairy tale parody and you have the gallant knight in the shining armor who goes up to the tower and calls out to the princess, and the princess comes out, and the princess lets her big hair down, but it's an afro, so it doesn't come down. The only part the only part that's supposed to be meaningful for that is the afro, not the knight, not the armor, not the tower. It's just the afro. The other part is just a cliche setting, and I think it's probably the same for that. The part that's important is that Confucius says Confucius is surrounded, and instead of giving his normal lecture about how they can't harm him because they are mean men, he said, well, shit happens. Okay, so that's
okay. I get it. It's kind of like you look at the edits and what the author was trying to add to the story or change the story. I get it. Okay. I guess to a newbie, we kind of take it all in. That's true, and then maybe that's the wrong idea. Yeah, sometimes maybe.
Right.
Okay. Well,
second, who exactly is Yang Hu? Do we know that, or is that just?
Okay, hold on. Well, okay.
No, Yang Zheng is he's the guy who's speaking. He's not. This isn't the text. This is the guy who's talking right now.
No, there's two Yangzes. There's the Yangtze of there's the Yangtze that knows everything about Confucianism. That's the one talking right now, and then there's the Yangtze from the ancients. I don't know.
I'm saying Yang Hu, the guy who they mistook Confucius for.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
There's a well-known history that's being told in the Suji, etc., and in the commentaries of the Analects. Yang Hu was this kind of he was it's kind of a warlord, kind of who broke away from his lord, from his gong of the state of Song. I could post a small biography. Maybe it's better if I have to do it from memory. I'm going to mix things up. But he is a known entity at the time. There's a whole story of why he was interacting with Confucius and what his reputation as kind of a rogue warlord was, and why he was threatening Confucius, because Confucius wasn't willing to be in his service, and why Quang had some trouble with Yang Hu as well, which is, I think, told in the Zhuāngzǐ in some story there towards the end. But I'll try to find the story. I'll post it.
Yeah, so I guess this could be so I guess, and I agree with NHP's assessment of how to read classical text, because this is contemporary with texts that would have been written in the West, like Plutarch, which I've been reading recently, and so when you're talking about fixed historical incidents or even mythical incidents, the history is fixed. Everyone knows what the history is. It's the specific speeches that the historian or the philosopher puts in their mouths. That's what needs to be read. And here it seems to be discussing, Confucius actually seems to be taking a sort of fatalistic angle, that this is simply where fate has brought him. And if you want to talk about comparing him to Yang He, in this case, what Zhuāngzǐ is doing, or the author of the Zhuāngzǐ is doing here, is on the one hand, it could be describing him as maybe unpragmatic compared to Yang He. Would you say that's maybe accurate, that it's comparing, that it's saying that his fatalism is in a way kind of unpragmatic?
No, but Yang Hu is not meant to be a pragmatic person. It was just a threatening force who used violence to intimidate actors, and just he's used as a backdrop story to motivate what Confucius will say in all these stories that use this scene. But it's not that he is supposed to be a black and white contrast with Confucius. It's really that they mistook him for Yang Hu, but not on the basis of values or whatsoever.
So you would say that it wasn't Confucius's speech that cleared him of the charge of being Yang He. They just realized it independently, and his speech was sort of an unnecessary.
Like the way this anecdote is used in Confucian text, if Confucius says something, it's to his disciples, to Lu or to Zhan Shou. But it's not that he talks to the men of Quang to convince them, no, I'm not Yang Hu for this and this, that reason. That never occurs. And that's the point, is that in I think in the Analects, what he says is just what can happen to me as long as I'm good. That's what he tells it. So don't worry about it. And here he says, okay, whatever is fate, whatever is fate, so be it. But that's not even a strong contrast between, like I said, from a Confucian perspective, that's completely permissible. and you could call it fatalism. Well, that's what the Maoist, what Mozi accused Confucians of, to give any value to Ming in that sense, to destiny. But it's not really a perversion of the original Confucian story. And if you want to say, well, we have to look at in what parts they differ, well, then you have to really compare those two stories and be precise in the kind of concepts and values that they differ in. And my take is that they don't really differ that much. Like you could say the one puts a little bit more value, more significance in destiny itself, and the other one puts a little more trust in some kind of morality that is in sync with heaven. But in both cases, the point would be you just have to, be in sync with destiny, with nature, or with a moral heaven or whatever. But there's no real conflict of interest there.
All right. I'll turn it back to our hosts, I guess, to see if how they want to proceed with the rest of the text.
Just sidebar, XYCB is having some audio issues, and
I can't hear half the people, so yeah.
Well, it would be fun if you could guess what the half that you didn't hear, what you thought it was, and then maybe we'll just open up a whole new dimension. But do you just want to read the rest of it, or do you have something you wanted to say?
No, I can read. I think chapter 10 is what I'm on, so that's what I'll read.
Okay. Chapter 10 is the long one. Cool. Okay.
Oh boy.
Here we go.
All right, chapter 10. Let me get some water. Chapter 10. Gongsun Long asked Mo of Wei, saying, "When I was young, I learned the teachings of the former kings, and when I was grown up, I became proficient in the practice of benevolence and righteousness. I brought together the views that agreed and disagreed. I considered the questions about hardness and whiteness. I set forth what was to be affirmed and what was not, and what was to be allowable and what was not. I studied painfully the various schools of thought, and made myself master of the reasonings of all their masters. I thought that I had reached a good understanding of every subject, but now I have heard the words of Zhuāngzǐ. They throw me into a flutter of surprise. I do not know whether it be that I do not come up to him in the power of discussion, or that my knowledge is not equal to his. But now I do not feel able to open my mouth, and should venture to ask you what course I should pursue." Whoa. Gongsun Mo leaned forward on his stool, drew a long breath, looked up to heaven, smiled, and said, "Have you not heard of the frog in the dilapidated well, and how it said to the turtle of the eastern sea, 'How I enjoy myself'? I leap upon the parapet of this wall. I enter, and having by means of the projections formed by the fragments of the broken tiles of the lining, proceeded to the water. I draw my legs together, keep my chin up, and strike out. When I've got to the mud, I dive till my feet are lost in it. Then turning around, I see that of the shrimp, crabs, and tadpoles, there's not one that can do like me. Moreover, when one has entire command of all the water in the gully and hesitates to go forward, it is the greatest pleasure to enjoy oneself here in this dilapidated well. Why do not you, master, often come and enter and see it for yourself?" The turtle of the eastern sea, who was then proceeding to go forward, but before he had put in his left foot, he found his right knee caught and held fast. On this he hesitated, drew back, and told the frog all about the sea, saying, "A distance of 1,000 li is not sufficient to express its extent, nor would a line of 8,000 cubits be equal to sound its depth. In the time of Yu, for 9 years out of 10, the flooded land all drained into it, and its water was not sensibly increased. And in the time of Thong, for 7 years out of 8, there was a drought, but the rocks on the shore saw no diminution of the water because of it. Thus it is that no change is produced in its waters by any cause operating for a short time or a long. in that they do not advance nor recede for any addition or subtraction, whether great or small. And this is the great pleasure afforded by the Eastern Sea. When the frog of the dilapidated well heard this, he was amazed and terror-struck, and lost himself in surprise. And moreover, when you, who have not the wisdom enough to know where the discussions about what is right and what is wrong should end, still desire to see through the words of Zhuāngzǐ, that is like employing a mosquito to carry a mountain on its back, or a millipede to gallop as fast as the hoe runs. Tasks to which both the insects are sure to be unequal. Still further, when you, who have not wisdom enough to know the words employed in discussing very mysterious subjects, yet hasten to show your sharpness of speech on any occasion that may occur, is this not being like the frog of the dilapidated well? And that Zhuāngzǐ now plants his foot on the yellow springs beneath the earth, and anon rises to the height of the Empyrean, without any regard to south and north, with the freedom he launches out in every direction, and is lost in the unfathomable. Without any regard to east and west, starting from what is abysmally obscure, he comes back to what is grandly intelligible. All the while, you, sir, in amazement, search for his views to examine them, and grope among them for the matter of discussion. This is just like peeping at the heavens through a tube, or aiming at the earth with an awl, and are not both implements too small for the purpose? Go your ways, sir, and have you not heard of the young learners of Shouling, how they did in Handan? Before they had acquired what they might have done in the capital, they had forgotten what they had learned to do in their old city, and were marched back to it on their hands and knees. If you do not go away, you will forget your old acquirements and fail in your profession. Gongsun Long gaped on the speaker and could not shut his mouth, and his tongue clave to its roof. He slank away and ran off. The rest of the chapters are really short. I think I'll just read them really quick. Chapter 11. Zhuāngzǐ was once fishing in the river Pu when the king of Chu sent two great officers to him with the message, "I wish to trouble you with the charge of all within my territories." Zhuāngzǐ kept on holding his rod without looking round, and said, "I have heard that in Chu there is a spirit like tortoiseshell, the wearer of which died 3,000 years ago, and which the king keeps in his ancestral temple in a hamper covered with a cloth. Was it better for the tortoise to die and leave its shell to be thus honored? Or would it have better for it to live and keep on dragging its tail through the mud?" The two officers said, "It would have been better for it to live and draw its tail after it over the mud. Go your ways. I will keep drawing my tail after me through the mud." Chapter 12. Huizhi being a minister in the state of Liang, Zhuāngzǐ went to see him. Someone had told Huizhi that Zhuāngzǐ was to come with a wish to supersede him in his office, on which he was afraid, and instituted a search for the stranger all over the kingdom for 3 days and 3 nights. After this, Zhuāngzǐ went and saw him, and said, "There is in the south a bird called the young phoenix. Do you know it? Starting from the South Sea, it flies to the northern, never resting but on the big Nonia." That's a weird word. That may be an idiosyncratic word. Never eating but the fruit of the Melia Azederach, and never drinking but from the purest springs. An owl which had got a putrid rat once, when a phoenix was passing overhead, looked up to it and gave an angry scream. Do you wish now, in your possession of the kingdom of Liang, to frighten me with a similar scream? Chapter 13. Zhuāngzǐ and Huizhi were walking on the dam over the Hao, when the former said, "These thrisas came out and play about at their ease. That is the enjoyment of fishes." The other said, "You are not a fish. How do you know what constitutes the enjoyment of fishes?" Zhuāngzǐ rejoined, "You are not I. How do you know that I do not know what constitutes the enjoyment of fishes?" Huizhi said, "I am not you, and though indeed I do not fully know you, you are certainly not a fish, and the argument is complete against your knowing what constitutes the happiness of fishes." Zhuāngzǐ replied, "Let us keep to your original question. You said to me, How do you know what constitutes the enjoyment of fishes? You knew that I knew it, and yet you put your question to me. Well, I know it from our enjoying ourselves together over the how. And that is the end of chapter 13 and the end of The Floods of Autumn, a chapter from the outer chapters of the Zhuāngzǐ. Okay, I'll return it to our hosts to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much for reading that. XYCB, do you have anything to say? Can you actually hear anything still?
Yeah, I can hear you and cultural literacy.
Thank goodness.
I don't think I can hear anyone else. So yeah, you guys go ahead. Enjoy yourselves.
No, but what did you where do you want to bring the discussion? I've just been vibing.
Well, since I won't be able to hear the discussion, I'm not sure where I want to bring it has any importance.
Oh, well,
it's a very Taoist problem.
Did you not have an opinion about the last few chapters? I'm still digesting it. This is the first time I'm hearing it. I apologize for my lack of taste.
I don't know.
Yes.
I feel kind of like I'm screaming my opinion into the void, even if I had one, which I don't really. I've already done the fish. Oh no, I haven't done the fish. Sorry.
You've not done the fish?
I've done the other fish story.
Oh.
I wrote about the other fish story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, does anyone else have anything else they would like to say about the chapter before I inevitably start rambling?
Yeah, just regarding the 12th paragraph or verse or chapter, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, they use very strange words in this one section. It's like it's repeated, so each section, each phrase starts with the word "fei," meaning not, but never eating but the fruit of the meal, never resting but on the bignonia. Never eating but the fruit of the Melia Azdara, and never drinking but from the purest springs. I wonder if Yang Zhongnu has any comment on those words and their significance, because they sound like made up or mythical words to describe.
They sound like words from Dune.
A rock.
Yeah, especially Quasi's Haderach.
Yeah.
But the tree thing, like out of the top of my head, there's a lot of commentaries that I haven't memorized about it that tell a lot of stories. But I can say that the tree at least occurs, especially in the first chapter of the Zhuāngzǐ, in a famous story where he talks about this really big tree, which is useless according to his friend Huizhi in that story, if I recall that correctly. But then Zhuangzi says, "Oh, you could make a boat out of it, etc." So it's not used. But in Chinese, it's a wutong, and it doesn't really have this kind of punning going on that you have with bignonia. My translation here by Richard Lin translates it as the Paulonia tree, which is much how to say that much more common. That's not really a strange tree at all. The bird, of course, is a really weird bird, which you can't really translate properly unless you resort to the phoenixes or the rocks, etc. Lin translates it as a phoenix fowl. I think Edward posted a picture that is kind of looks like a phoenix in a way. But then what he eats, let me see. Lin translates that just as bamboo seed, not that really weird real or pseudo-Latin thing that your translation uses. So bamboo seed is much more plebeian. There's nothing strange about that. Yeah, don't really have anything to add unless you would delve into the commentaries for these words. Sometimes you can also look at the sound, right? So in classical, or at least in the modern pronunciation of classical Chinese, the bird would be yuanchu, the tree would be wutong, the seed would be lianshi, and then you have the springs that they go to. It's just Li Quan. That's not even a proper name. That's just the sweet water. I don't think that refers to a specific kind of spring. Yeah, but it doesn't really ring a bell for any kind of homonyms that you get from Yuanchu or Wutong or Lianshi or Li Quan. Could just be without any deeper levels in this particular case. But I could say that they're not as punny or weird as some of the other names that are used throughout the Zhuāngzǐ, like the names for hunchback people, or for some of the weird followers of the Tao. There's not really any strangeness like that going on in these names.
Yeah, I'm just meditating on chapter 12 now that we're talking about the words and stuff. Is the message of the paragraph just that Zhuāngzǐ, everyone's shook by Zhuāngzǐ's presence and he's like, I don't give a fuck. Sorry, I can swear now because I realize we're not being recorded. Is that the point of the thing, that everyone kind of panicked when he showed up and then he's just like, I don't care, stop talking? That's kind of feels like what he's kind of. It's just a long takedown of the guy that's paranoid that he showed up. That's how I read it, anyway. Let me just go through the paragraphs again in my head. If anyone else has anything to say, I do apologize. How did it come to this? How did it come to me hosting the Zhuāngzǐ space of all things? Was it? Yeah. Because I kind of feel like the main, just like we realized in the Robert Zhe discussion last week, it kind of feels like the last few paragraphs are not really, well, maybe they're in theme, but it's somehow like there's this big chunk in the beginning that's thematic, and then just like, okay, well, let's tack on some other stuff towards the end. Is there an authorship dispute as well? That maybe this last few were written by other people who wanted their 10 cents published in Zhuāngzǐ outer chapters. Kind of feels like it. Let's see. Okay,
personally, when it comes to like chapter 8, given the fact that it's basically what could essentially be a chapter from the Analects, or verse, I suppose would be a better word, but when you look at verse 8, considering that's basically just a copy of what you might see from Confucius with an altered speech, I think in this case, how that chapter at least is supposed to be read is, undoubtedly it's plagiarized. That's not really in dispute, but that specific chapter, I think it's going to be informed by the context of what preceded it, specifically this context about meanness and about meanness versus subtleness, and on the other hand, I believe the contrast is meanness versus nobility, with the mean being low and the noble being high. And on the other hand, there's another contrast between subtlety and coarseness. In that case, with subtlety actually being like low, or the coarse being what would normally be called the great or the high, or just big things.
Big things. Zhuāngzǐ, you've had your hand up first, then we'll get to hinges.
Yeah, it's a bit in agreement with cultural literati. I do think if you look at these later stories, at first glance they would seem disconnected or less coherently themed or connected to the theme of the overall chapter. But if you look closely at the kind of words and concepts and themes that are being brought up, I do think there's quite a strong coherence throughout the entire chapter. Even that quote unquote plagiarized story, kind of Confucian Analects type of story, You have the theme of Zhiming, of knowing your destiny, of relativizing the difference between being in danger or being safe, being alive or being death. In that sense, that all lines up with the kind of sage who can walk through fire or who can drown himself in water and not see it as being harmed. It's not true harm. It's only physical harm, formal harm. It has nothing to do with the level above form in that sense. And then these stories about Gong Sunlong and Huizi, you have again these themes of timeliness, of relative. When he talks to Huizi being worried that he will take his place. What is important for you is not important for me in my position, but it can be important in your position. But it's all a difference in perspective. That's also connected to the earlier stories as well. The same thing with Zhuāngzǐ fishing at the Pool River, and then the final story, especially, you have this flipping of perspectives again. Can I know what other people feel or other things, how other things are? Can I talk about it with another third party, and how can that conversation take place? It's again in line with this whole theme of, if you want to use the word relativist perspective, but there's also this transcendent solution out of the relativism, that you can know that the fish are happy. And I can tell you why they are happy. Because I am here, the fishes are there, and I see that they are happy just doing their own thing. They are not bothering me in that sense. So to me, that's just, it is a very coherent chapter. I would see it as kind of a singularly authored chapter. And it could be, not to say that there's borrowing or that there's even multiple people writing these stories, but they are put together as a single voice in that sense. I do think that it's a different voice than the author of the Qi Wulun chapter or some of the other stories that are grouped together or split off. But there's no conflict. I don't see any very strong conflict between the content of the Chou Shui chapter and any of the chapters that are now grouped in the inner chapters. In that sense, if we would go down to this road of authorship discussion, I'm feeling much more strongly to the side of Esther Klein, who says it's kind of silly to make this distinction between inner chapters and outer chapters as earlier and later, or some kind of original Zhuāngzǐ and some kind of downstream followers of Zhuāngzǐ in the Han Dynasty. That doesn't add up with the with what we know of the history of the text. And also it doesn't really add up, as I see it, with the content of this chapter, because there's no strong conflict, even though you
Wait.
could to say, oh, he's talking about the words of Zhuāngzǐ. So clearly this is not Zhuāngzǐ himself writing this story or even this chapter. But still, that doesn't mean there's any serious conflict in what the so-called original Zhuāngzǐ would value and what the author of this chapter values.
I see.
So you're talking about like people who are downstream of Zhuāngzǐ. I believe in modern internet parlance, those would be the sub-Zhuāngzites. That's a joke you're not going to get.
It's the same, right? You have Confucius, you have Mencius, you have Xunzi. So did they wrote their text, or were they written by direct followers, or by followers of followers, or followers of followers of followers, or different parts written by different stages of followers, right? But it's I think we've moved already quite beyond the idea that master literature, the Zhuāngzǐ, among the Xunzi, or even Han Feizi, are necessarily should be read as written by this original person, and that anything that cannot be directly tied to this original person has to be regarded as how to say that, derivative.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a wrong lens to look at how that kind of literature in early China functioned and how it was created, from what we know, at least from the sources that we have.
In my small brain, I'm thinking of it as like anything I do is Chinese culture. So anyway, Hinges, sorry, keep moving on. Hinges, you have had your hand up. Do you have something to add? Can everyone else hear
yes.
you? Okay, here we go.
There we go. I've tried putting in headphones. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's see. I'm just going to affirm what Zhuāngzǐ is saying about the coherence of the text. That this is what we've got. Yeah. So I'm not going to reiterate that, but yeah, I really kind of concur with that and agree that there's a lot of just conceptual continuity. One of the things I think is really fun to think about is just that, this becomes a foundational text. I mean, Zhuāngzǐ as a whole becomes a, hugely important text in Daoism. And, they're celebrating this chapter in particular celebrates, the greatness of the way. And I think it's worth, kind of thinking about like, how do we understand the way, right? I think it's worth kind of throwing that into the mix as well too, right? We haven't really talked about that in this conversation. Like, what is the way? There's different ways of understanding that. There's different people have kind of some different approaches to it. Zhuāngzǐ as a philosophical text, is kind of like it's a proto-Taoist text. Like the Zhuāngzǐ and the Daoism, they weren't. The Daoism occurs after these texts are written, right? So they get put together in the Han Dynasty in the histories of saying, oh well, if we look back at the Warring States period, there's this Taoist school, and Zhuāngzǐ and Lao Tzu are both these foundational Taoists. Well, but again, so like Zhuāngzǐ and the Daoism, they didn't look at each other. They didn't identify as like, oh well, yes, I'm writing as a part of the Taoist school. So you find these like, the idea of Dao is absolutely running throughout, Daoism and Zhuāngzǐ, but it's not necessarily detailed in the same way that you see in like later Taoists, kind of the Han Lao, Huang Lao Taoism, or religious Taoism. So I want to get to is one of the aspects of Dao that you do get in this chapter that I think is really important is this idea that everything has its transformations and completions, right? And this is like one of the big themes that you see in Zhuāngzǐ is that things go through. There's a heaven decrees that you have a kind of natural course of life, that things start, they begin, they grow, they have their likes, they have their dislikes. There's a real strong naturalism. If we're thinking about philosophy, there's a real strong kind of like naturalism of saying, well, there's a certain kind of nature, just things are this way by virtue of being what they are. And I think that's helpful to think about, right? Is that the cosmos is this kind of ongoing natural process, and the world is this ongoing natural process. Life is this ongoing natural process. And for Zhuāngzǐ, the real issue, like all things go through their completions, right? And so like what heaven gives us is this ability to kind of live an interesting, interesting life. And the more ways that we can broaden our perspective, the better we can do that, right? And so I think a lot of this chapter is about, you could call it therapeutic, but it is also philosophical, right? You could, again, it recognizes a certain relativity of certain evaluations, but then it transcends that, right? That if you can see the greatness of the way, then you can see how all judgments emerge out of our interactions with the way. And so that's what we really got to kind of figure out. So I like it. I really like this chapter a lot.
I think does anyone else have any comments? Because I think that's quite a good place to end, just because we've been at this for 2.5 hours. I think that's a good place to kind of tie it up. Does anyone else have anything to add? XYC? Oh, Zhuāngzǐ, yes, you have your hand up. Yes.
Yeah, it's first in agreement with what Hinges was saying. A lot of that, and especially also the theme of transformation. But there is one kind of second theme running parallel to this theme of continuous relativizing transformation. That and Hinges says something like, yeah, it can be transcended as well. But it's actually, for me, always very fascinating to hear the Zhuāngzǐ talk about the possibility, for example, of being impervious to harm, being able to withstand fire and cold and death and life. And on the one hand, you can tie that back into this acceptance of natural transformation and everything, but at the same time, it is a real transcendence as well, and in a way a real absorption of this mode of transformation. It's not that you become a Taoist immortal, a Shenren, in the sense that you are physically unharmable and you will live forever in space and time as a god. You can, even as a physically mortal being, at the same time attain that same kind of later Taoist ideal of immortality while being mortal, just by fully embracing the value of transformation and of relativizing knowledge, etc., identity, etc., etc., etc. But there is a little bit of a tension there in the Zhuāngzǐ specifically, that on the one hand it's all about accepting destiny and accepting fate and accepting the limitations of the situation you are existing in, but at the same time this continuous promise of no, you can rise above that, and then actually, yes, you will be invulnerable. But what does that really mean, being invulnerable? At the same time, you will still die and you can still feel pain and whatever emotion, but it's not stoicist. It's not that you completely disassociate yourself, but at the same time you can live with it, and at the same time it's not relativist or nihilist. It's a very weird and interesting Zhuangzian way of dealing with this fact of existence.
All right. Does anyone else have a rebuttal to that one? Sorry to be so clipped, but 2.5 hours I think is a good time to end it, and we can start a new chapter or revisit the chapter if we feel like another week. XYCB, can you hear anything? I don't want to end it prematurely if you had something else to say as well as the host. S.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I
only heard about 1/3 of the previous stuff, so yeah, I have nothing to add.
And
to
this
that.
is, you didn't record this one, did you? So it's
Yeah. No, I didn't record.
Anyway, so I guess we could have sworn the whole time.
No, I prefer not to record.
What?
I prefer not recording.
Yeah, but
It's a moment in time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess we can call it now. Let me just run through the comments, see if there's anything else we missed out. He did say, what could we riff on Autumn Floods as a title? It's a question of the right time and place, as the floods come from the seasonal or timely rains. Timing. We mentioned timing, didn't we? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Like I think a lot of analysis of the chapter, they miss basically the first sentence of the whole thing that says, timeliness is already part of this Chōshui. So that's already part of the story of the river god. He gets very wide and he has the flooding because it was the time, the Shi, of that flooding. But that wasn't something that he himself accomplished. That was something that was part of the natural course of things that was going to happen. The problem with the river god is that he then thinks that it was his own achievement, and that's why he feels proud and that he can rule the world. whereas he should have just seen it as part of a bigger story, that he is just a part of, big or small, and that it doesn't really matter that he himself is big or small, but more that at a certain point in time he can be big, like when the flooding is going on. But it is very, I think, very relevant to point out that the Chou Shui is kind of a seasonal event, and that's pointed out by the story itself also.
Oh, and also one final request to Yangtze. I'm seeing in the comments, Catcher said, I could not hear the last part. This is in your rebuttal to Hinges earlier, before I started reading the comments. I could not hear the last part clearly by Yangtze. Could someone summarize or repeat it, as that's the part Catcher was most interested in? This is your rebuttal to Hinges before I started reading the comments.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it wasn't really a rebuttal, because I mostly agree
with
the
response.
It was more like an addendum to it, that it's weird that in the Zhuāngzǐ, on the one hand, transformation is so important, and accepting that everything constantly always transforms and positions are never absolute. But at the same time, it does offer some kind of solution, an eschatological way out, so to say, where you can rise above, or that's probably the wrong term. You should say that you can completely be in sync with this transformation. And then that's basically what Zhuāngzǐ would, or what the authors of the Zhuāngzǐ would think of as the real kind of immortality, and being invulnerable, and being free from all worry and harm, etc. And that's the only way you can accomplish that.
All right, Catcher, did you catch all of that, as it were? Catcher, no. Well, just give him a few more seconds to respond. I'm sure he did. He did say thank you in chat. So I think we can call it. I'm not seeing any other. No one else is typing. Okay, so thank you for attending. That was illuminating. Embarrassed to say, as per usual, that was my first time maybe being exposed to text. So I'm digesting it as we go along, making it up as we go along. And okay, so we should do this again next week. Actually, we're just about time for a bit of a discussion about Tian. If you remember, for those of you here, there was a recent kerfuffle about what Tian means, and a lot of strident opinions about whether there was a firmly mystical shamanic element to it, whether it can be mundane, totally mundane, political. And some of us were saying, yeah, we should discuss that because that's worthy of discussion, all the sides of it. So that might be the time for it. We might see who's available, who can speak. A lot of the people here have opinions. So that's a little teaser as to what might be coming next. Otherwise, you'll be the next chapter. I do want to go through all of the Zhuāngzǐ because I feel like this is the only way I'm going to go through it. Okay, so thanks for sticking around. Everyone, so well attended. This is a great time. We should just do this every week. Catcher's typing. If it's, please repeat the whole thing. I don't know if that's going to be possible. Okay. Anyway. Oh, okay. Oh, no. He says we might need to do a year of reading to do Tian. No, we don't. We just show up and riff. Okay, so thank you, everyone. And remember, have a good weekend or evening, depending on where you are. And remember, just survive in all things. Put yourself first and survive. That's my advice. Okay.
Oh yes. Also, I'd also like to thank everyone who read from the text. Granted, that was mostly me, but 1/3 of the stuff was read by other people as well. So I'd like to thank the readers of our text today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cultural Literati, for reading most of that. That was also very wonderful. Yes. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to leave the space now. XYCB, you have to leave also because you're also a host. Okay?